The Edge of the City was meant to be a documentary about the work of Bradford social services, but one part of the programme has attracted rather a lot of controversy. It describes the experiences of young white girls in the Bradford area who are said to be being groomed for sex by Asian men. The programme was due to be screened in May, just days before the local elections, in which the British National Party was contesting council seats. The BNP described the programme as a party political broadcast. But at the last minute, on the advice of West Yorkshire Police, Channel 4 withdrew The Edge of the City from transmission. It's now been rescheduled for screening next week, although there have been calls for it to be banned. Here's a clip from the programme in which a mother describes what's been happening in her family.
One Asian man was on the street outside our house talking to one of my daughters, and he said, "Us packies are going to have to watch what we're doing with you young uns now, because they're starting to come down on us for it." There were no thought that they were doing something wrong. I don't want any riots. I don't want bad feeling between any different cultures, but I don't want my daughter to be sexually abused so that this can carry on being a nice, quiet town.
Well, I spoke to Anna Hall, who made The Edge of the City, and Raina Azim, a barrister who specialises in child abuse cases. Anna began by explaining how she came across the grooming story.
I spent a period of about 3 months before I did any filming at all, going around just about every team in Bradford Social Services, talking to them, trying to understand what was going on for them, what the issues were for them. And I just found that, pretty much any professional who was working with young teenage girls would say to me, of course, you do know about third-party abuse, which was the term that is used to, I guess, describe this kind of form of abuse.
And you decided to pursue it, even though I think many people said to you, oh, this is going to be too difficult for you to tackle.
Basically, what we were trying to do is to find narratives and find ways of showing what social workers do. So we were very keen to try and engage with social workers who were going to be honest with us and talk to us about what the decisions that they had to make, what the risks were that they had to live with. And lots of people said to me, it's really difficult, it's too difficult, how on earth are you going to do that? You won't be able to identify anybody. Is it something that's worth doing?
But you did manage to tell the story. Were you then surprised by the controversy that it drew? Because it was only one story within several within the entire documentary.
Yeah, I think it's very important to point out that there are 3 other stories in this documentary, one of which is, hugely positive story about a young white offender in Bradford called Matthew, and he's assigned a tracker called Omar, who's a Pakistani man, and, that strand is all about the relationship between Matthew and Omar and the influence that Omar has not only on Matthew but also on his whole family, and I'm really pleased that that strand is there. In terms of the coverage of this particular issue, no, I'm not really surprised about the coverage that it's had. I think that it's a very difficult issue. It's obviously hugely culturally sensitive, and I still think that it's a story that needs to be told, and I'm not sorry that we've included it in this documentary, although I think it's really important that people see the documentary as a whole, not just as this one particular story.
Raina Azim, you've watched the documentary. What did you think about the way in which it was put together and this particular aspect of it was presented?
I think there is a powerful documentary to be made about child sexual abuse. I think there's a powerful documentary to be made about race issues and social workers. Unfortunately, this documentary isn't it. What I found was that there is too much crammed into it. There's a mishmash of half ideas, which could have made a very interesting programme. For example, the word grooming is used constantly in the narration by Miss Hall. And unfortunately, grooming is a very difficult and complex subject. It's a psychological subject, but there's no attempt to describe it, to understand it at all. Secondly, we're told that these girls can be lured away from their families by the promise of a mobile telephone or money, or a man telling them that he loves them. So the parenting of these girls is not explored at all. And then thirdly, the big issue that's got all the attention is the race issue. But instead of looking at it in perspective and putting it in context, we get throwaway lines like, there's a drug problem amongst the young Asians in Keighley, with no attempt to link the drugs problem with the sexual exploitation. And yet we're told constantly that drugs were involved in sexual abuse of the girls. So I have no idea after watching this programme what kind of Asian men were involved. Are they professional Asian men? Are they all Asian men in Keighley? What context? How do they fit in?
I think I'd just like to pick up on a couple of things that Raina said. First of all, I would totally disagree that these girls have not been groomed. They are being groomed. They've been groomed on a very, very careful process over a number of months. They are vulnerable girls. Of course they're vulnerable. But they are being seduced, they're being flattered, they're being offered alcohol, they're being offered drugs. They're not offered money at the beginning. We're talking about young girls here who are children, who are enticed into thinking that this man loves them. And that is the beginning of a grooming process which is very, very complex. And I would also disagree that we haven't tried to describe that in the film. I think we have described that, and I think we've tried to describe that very clearly through the use of real testimony from girls and real testimony from social workers and from mothers. I'd also like to come back on the point about parenting. I think that the concept that these girls are, white trash, or there's an insidious idea that they're not worth bothering about because they're from bad homes, I would totally and utterly want to refute that. I think that, the mothers that I work with, they didn't have bad homes. They were in a very difficult position where their children were abused outside the school playground, on the way home from school, and there seemed to be so little that they could do about it.
Raina, these women have a right to have their story heard.
Of course they have a right to have their story heard, and I don't per se believe that if an Asian is shown in a bad light that should not be done. That's not the issue. The issue is, how does this documentary come across to the average viewer? So I'm looking at it as a viewer, not as someone who's read all the articles behind it or has heard Anna Hall speak about it. I've got to take it away as a viewer, and I took away very little from this programme other than a very sensational story that's repeatedly in the narration: Asian men are abusing white girls. I'm not surprised that extremist groups have picked up on that, because that is the story that's selling in the media. And if you have to explain your documentary, then I'm afraid you haven't done a good job.
Anna, how did you feel about that? Because the BNP described this film as a party political broadcast.
Yeah, they did. And I also condemn the BNP for jumping on such a serious issue. I mean, this is an issue, this is not a news story. This is an issue that's been around, that was covered in the press last year. I would also disagree that we've covered it from a news angle. I think what we've tried to bring to it is a very personal portrayal of two mothers searching for their daughters, and of first-person testimony from girls who have been groomed.
But the timing at which the film was initially due to go out was enormously sensitive, and that added to the controversy because it was days before the local elections. So, in a sense, did you feel that added to perhaps the distortion of the film, the distortion of what you intended it to be about?
Yeah, I think the timing was unfortunate, and I think that Channel 4 were right to remove it from the schedule at that point. I think that it wasn't helpful to have that film shown in the run-up to the local election, and I do agree with that. I think that, just coming back to another point that Raina mentioned about the drugs problem, I think that the film is very clear that we say in the commentary that there's a minority of young men who the police and social services feel are perpetuating this abuse in Bradford. It's very clear that it's a minority of young men. And I think that, for the average British Asian person watching that film, I think, and I hope, that they will see that this behaviour is something that, you cannot condone this kind of behaviour. And we're talking about child abuse, and we're talking about child protection here. And we need to look at it for what it is, which is, it is a minority of young men. And I think we make very clear that these young men are involved in other forms of crime.
Raina, can you tackle an issue like this without stigmatising a whole community?
If we had been told that there were drug-dealing Asians in Keighley who form gangs and abuse young white girls, that would be one story. What we're told is there are Asian men in this area abusing white girls. That's a wholly different story, and that is what stigmatizes the whole community. No one condones this kind of behavior, whatever race or background they are. But that's how the story is being played. And I actually don't agree that the programme should have been banned, because I think if it had been shown late at night, very few people would have actually commented on it. But because of the publicity, a lot of people are going to watch this programme and take away a very distorted view of the Asian community from it.
I was speaking to Raina Azim and Anna Hall. An Edge of the City will be shown on Channel 4 next Thursday.